Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird, Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
Episode 285. Sallyanne Monti is an award-winning author, editor, and storyteller. Her nonfiction book, Light at the End of the Tunnel, a memoir, won the 2019 Imagine Award for Best Nonfiction Book at the Imaginarium Convention, and that's where we met Sallyanne for the first time. And she is currently the Director of Marketing for the Golden Crown Literary Society, a short story author, and a memoirist, and a great storyteller in her own right. Sallyanne also has had a lot of different paranormal experiences in her life. And we want to talk about how those paranormal experiences, whether it be coincidences or apparitions or things like that, have affected her storytelling and the way she communicates. So joining us from lovely Palm Springs, California, Sallyanne Monti. Sallyanne, how are you feeling this fine day?
I'm feeling great, Mike. Thank you so much for having me on. I was so happy to meet you and Wendy at the Imaginarium Conference in 2019.
Yeah, and just to give people some background, we know you're a storyteller, we know you're an author, but how did you get there? Like, where did you come from? What's your start? Where were you born?
Well, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and I moved to Bensonhurst, Brooklyn when I was 2 years old, or I was told that's what happened.
Okay.
And Bensonhurst, Brooklyn became very famous in the late 70s when John Travolta walked through it, eating pizza, carrying paint cans, and revolutionizing disco. It was filmed in my neighborhood. In fact, I used to go to the disco with the dance floor that lit up, and it was a very it's a pocket of Brooklyn that hasn't really changed much.
I love that dance floor.
Revolutionized everything, and it's just kind of carried forward. So that's kind of where I started.
I love that dance floor from Saturday Night Fever. That's one of my favorite. It always makes me think about it. I used to watch a show called Dance Fever with Danny Terrio when I was a little kid. And it was so ridiculous. But no, that's a great introduction as to where you're from, because a lot of us have seen Saturday Night Fever and we think about that neighborhood and are familiar with it. So that's a perfect kind of introduction to where you're from. And when was the first time you had some kind of experience where you thought, hey, maybe this isn't grounded in the same kind of reality that I was expecting to happen?
Well, it's interesting because from a very young child, I had and got gut feelings, very strong gut feelings. But I didn't always recognize them. But I can go back into probably as far back as 5 years old. I just felt like I was going to live in California one day. I mean, growing up in Brooklyn, especially in Bensonhurst, it was a Catholic or Jewish neighborhood. It was Italian people, Jewish people, and that was it. And you grew up, you were born there, you lived right there where you were born within a few blocks. You spent your whole life there, and that's where you exited the earth for this part of the journey. But I always felt like I wanted to live in California. I knew nothing about California. When I was in kindergarten, I drew a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge and brought it home to my parents and said, I'm going to live in California. And they looked at me like I was crazy because here I am, this little Italian Catholic girl who's supposed to, get married and move upstairs from my parents and make babies. So they were like, yeah. But that's my earliest recollection of spirituality and gut feelings. And it did come to fruition. It ties into my memoir. And I've had my entire life has been driven by gut feelings and defining moments.
So you say gut feelings and defining moments, that kind of intuition that we talk about. So you've always had some kind of attraction to California, attraction to the West. When it ties into your light at the end of the tunnel, when you talk about your memoir, did you start to feel like coincidences or synchronicities or things like that that kind of tied into your move that gave you that feeling?
I did. Growing up, I always knew when I was going to meet somebody that was going to change my life, because it would almost feel like I got gut punched, and it would happen randomly, just for no reason at all. And I didn't know what it was when I was younger, but when I was in my 20s, I really started to pay attention to it and manifest that. And I was in my early 30s, and it was 1995, and I had 4 little kids. They were all in school. I had a job. I was also volunteering as a teacher in a preschool, all kinds of stuff. So I had a very full life. And I was coming home from work one day, and I got to the corner of my street. I stopped at a stop sign, and I had that gut punch. It was more than an intuition. It was that punch. And what went through my mind was involuntary. And my mind said to me, it just ran my life in front of me involuntarily, from a small child up to the point where I was all these defining moments, growing up, going to school, getting a boyfriend, getting married, all of these things, having a job, all these things just flowed through me up to the point where I audibly said, on this corner, I better appreciate this life that I have, because something huge is going to happen. I just knew it. I didn't know what it was. And that was in May of 1995. And sometimes these feelings come to fruition right away. And sometimes they take years before something real happens and I can tie it to that. But this one happened in August of the same year. I met a woman named Mickey Neal through a misguided email. And back then, we're talking late 90s, no internet, no address books. Everything was DOS-driven. AOL was making a fortune by the minute. That's how people connected to each other. There was no web, none of it. So I had sent an email to a friend of mine who lived a couple of states over, and I left the number 1 off, and it went to this woman named Mickey, who lived in California, and our lives exploded from that point forward. We just knew we were destined to meet each other. We became instant friends, and it just exploded to the point where, now this is August of 95. By September of 1996, I had sold my house in Staten Island, New York, and me, my husband, my ex-mother-in-law, the 4 kids, we all moved to California with our various pets.
So what was your, that original email that you sent that, went to Nikki and you became friends, when you say it was like a misdirected email, what were you emailing about?
I was emailing a friend of mine. We were just conversing about music, and his email was sticks@netcom.com. And Mickey's email was sticks1. And because she didn't have an address book, you had to always type the email. So sometimes you just messed up the email, and that's what happened. It went to this to Mickey, and she wrote me back and said, well, you must be sending this to Thomas, because I don't know who you are, but I keep getting this email. Everybody's leaving off the number 1, and that's how it started.
Okay, so that's Styx, S-T-Y-X, like the river Styx, or like the band Styx?
Yeah, S-T-Y-X, S.
Okay. Were you guys big fans of the band Styx? That's why they had those names? Or was it just more like a river Styx kind of thing?
No, it was, my friend Thomas was a drummer, so that's why he was Styx.
I see.
Was tall and thin, and her mom used to call her Mick the Stick, and that's why she picked Styx as her email, and I think Stick, S-T-I-C-K, wasn't available, so...
Right. Okay, so it wasn't just like they were just like, okay, we love Mr. Roboto so much, we're going to get an email address. Okay, fair enough.
It would have been Oingo Boingo if it was that.
Okay, hey, all right, Danny Elfman, he's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So you're getting there, and now how did you convince the whole family? Like you said, you're like, okay, your ex-husband, your mother-in-law, and 4 children. And how old are the kids?
And a dog and a turtle.
Right. And a dog. How old are the kids in the mid-1990s?
Our baby was 6. Our son was 6. Our youngest daughter was 7.5. And then our other 2 daughters were 10 and 11.
And what was the deciding factor? Were you like, you know what? I kind of just want to move. what was your husband
Well,
like? Hey, well, I got to find a job and stuff like that, or was he ready to go?
Well, interestingly enough, he had a city job. He worked for the New York City Transit Authority, and Rudy Giuliani was the mayor at the time, Giuliani. And he had revamped New York City financially. He cleaned up Times Square at that point. He reallocated funding, and he laid off a ton of city workers. He condensed services. And my ex-husband worked for New York City Transit, and he'd been there for 15 years and done the nights and the weekends in the not so safe neighborhoods. And that's where they were going to send him back. They said, we're not letting you go. You have seniority, but you're going to have to go to the South Bronx, which was a tough neighborhood, and be a token booth clerk, even though that wasn't his job. He was a warehouse manager. And they said, that's what we can offer you. And in all seriousness, they were putting token booth clerks on fire in those days.
Right. Oh, man.
Just throw bombs into the little slot. And so it was a really dangerous job. And we had wanted to move for many years. He had also had an interest in moving to California. We talked about it even before we had children. We had a puzzle on our dining room table. It was a 5,000-piece puzzle that we had made of the San Francisco skyline. We had no idea why we did it at the time, but it made sense when we started to become, after that, we had a desire to move to California. And Mickey became the catalyst for that because we didn't want to leave his job, and his job wasn't viable anymore because that position was a position he couldn't live with, and our family didn't want to have that risk. So it just felt like everything happened for a reason, and that's how we wound up moving to California.
I remember New York City, like you said, the Times Square and stuff like that. So New York City in the early 1990s, I'd always read about this guitar store called Manny's Music in like guitar magazines. And I'm like, oh, and so we spent one summer in Fairfield, Connecticut, my family. And my mother's like, oh, we'll go into the city and we'll go to see a Broadway show and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, I want to go see Manny's Music. And I want to see all these, different locations of rock clubs and things like that were exciting to me as a 16-year-old or whatever. And we go out there and I'm like, my mother was almost embarrassed. She's like, half these places are porno theaters. Or, all the, and Manny's Music ended up being tiny. It was still historic and cool. But, Times Square at the time was also very different, I would say, than when you go now. And it's a lot more family friendly and it's just a lot different. That idea, I remember just walking through and being like, even as a 16-year-old being like, oh man, even I'm a little embarrassed for these places to go with my mother.
Yeah, you're much younger than I am. I'm 58. In fact, I'll be 59 next week. But Times Square was triple X theaters and pornography and peep shows and all kinds of stuff like that. And Giuliani really eliminated all of that and made it what it is today. So, but it had a ripple effect.
Right, and the ripple effect was your husband's job.
Yeah, it was the one thing that tied us to New York because we had tried to move to other states, and it just didn't feel right. But that job was the one thing, because my job was more fluid, and I could get I was more of a stay-at-home parent. At that time, I had curtailed my career, and I was doing shuffling the kids all over in a part-time work position, and he had the full-time responsibility. So that was the one thing that was keeping us in New York. And when that came off the table and meeting Mickey, it all opened up like a vessel. I mean, like, it was an amazing time. The energy around us was insane. And we were able to sell our home and move cross country with all the kids and all of that. So it really was an adventure.
And so you'd always felt drawn, you felt compelled, and you met somebody who you clicked with right away, and that gave you a reason to go out there and a reason to leave.
Yeah.
Were you finding that you were having any other kind of, things at the time that seemed to be weird or out of the ordinary, or little coincidences or little synchronicities that kind of stuck out where you're like, this is the absolute right decision for us? Were there little things that led you to have certainty in that change?
it was kind of a big thing that happened that led to certainty, because naturally when we told our families that we were doing this, people thought we were crazy. We were very much New Yorkers living in a very narrow-minded society in the inner boroughs of New York City. At that time, we were living in Staten Island. And the culture back then was still, you pretty much grow up and stay where you are born, within a radius. People just don't leave. In fact, when they go on trips and they travel, they don't often travel very far. I mean, that was what I was raised in. That was the neighborhood we were living in. That's what our kids were raised in. But when I was 6 months pregnant of our first child, our daughter, my mom passed away in 7 weeks from cancer, from 7 weeks from diagnosis, and she was 44 years old, and it was devastating to our family.
Of course.
And after our daughter was born, when she was about 3 weeks old, I was having a rare moment of sleep, because, you have a baby, they don't sleep that well when they're newborns. But I happened to get a couple of hours of sleep, and I felt like somebody shook me, like pushed me on the shoulder. Somebody would say, "Wake up." And I opened my eyes, and I looked, and standing in front of me was my mother. And she's wearing this nightgown that she always used to wear, this white, flowy nightgown. And I looked at her, and she smiled at me, and she kind of hugged herself. And she pointed to the baby's room. And I remember, because I was still obviously with my husband at the time, I woke him up, and I'm like, "Wake up, wake up," because him and my mom shared the same birthday. They were very, very close. But by the time he woke up, she was gone. So I had that happen where my mom had visited me. And it happened again in our house in Staten Island. The first incident was in Brooklyn. We were living upstairs from my parents at the time. And we moved to Staten Island, had our own home, and it happened again. I was sleeping, and it was in the midst of all of this, should we not move to California type thing. I woke up just out of a dead sleep, and there was my mom again, just standing there and looking at me, and she nodded her head, and she was gone. So both me and my ex-husband took that as a sign, because her influence on us was very strong, even though she wasn't around on our, in our consciousness anymore. So that happened. And in fact, she's reappeared in Sedona. We have a second home in Sedona. I mean, we could talk about that now, or we could talk about that later.
No, but, I mean, I would say let's real quick. Let's talk a little bit about this. Your mother, and how she seems to be some kind of paranormal influence, or at least she appears to you in times where you're looking for. Does it seem to be like a crisis, or you're looking for direction? I mean, obviously, shortly after a newborn child, if I remember correctly, that's always like a crisis.
It's pretty stressful.
But also when you're having
the first one, you don't know what you're doing. You got to figure it all out.
But when you're having a crisis of your faith, and like, I'm going to leave what I know, I'm going to leave the place I've lived in all my life. And then she appears again to either give you direction or to give you comfort. So you have a couple of things right there. And now the next time she appeared was something happening in your life, in your home in Sedona. And we'll get back to how you got that stuff. But is it that same kind of vein that you were going through something and then she appeared when you needed her?
Not so much in Sedona, but the next time I saw her was not Sedona. It was during, I'm trying to think if we were in California. So she came to me before we moved to California. And then, after we moved to California, Mickey and our relationship exploded, and we were, my memoir, Light at the End of the Tunnel, is about this love story between Mickey and I. We were both married for 20 years to our husbands, and we fell in love. But when we were in California, and all of this was starting to unravel in my house in California, the same thing happened. My mom came to me. She was standing right by the bed, and she didn't say anything. And I wasn't sure what that message was. So a friend of mine knew a psychic, and a very legitimate psychic and intuit. And I had a reading with this person, and she didn't know who I was. There was no Facebook in those days. There was no way to kind of, check everybody out.
Right.
So, you could talk about things that are right there. She didn't know anything about me at all. And the first thing she said to me is, "Your mom isn't on this planet anymore." And I said, "Yes, that's right." And she said, "Well, she's standing right here, and she's wearing this white nightgown and this white flowing nightgown, and she's holding the hand of a little girl." And my mom had a miscarriage before me. I was the first live birth my parents had. I had 2 brothers and me, but before me was a miscarriage girl. And so I didn't say anything to the psychic. I was like, oh my gosh, but she went on to say, your mom said to tell you she understands what you're going through, and she's okay with it. She accepts you as you are. So I'm like, yeah, okay, that's kind of a generic statement. Anyone could say that. But then she said this. She said, your mom said to tell you that her feet are okay. They don't hurt anymore. And my mother used to get terrible cramps in her feet for her entire life. In fact, she probably had thyroid cancer undiagnosed because she had a tumor in her neck. And that is a symptom of thyroid issues because my wife had thyroid cancer and she was getting these cramps in her feet. So this psychic said to me, your mom said her feet are okay. They don't hurt anymore. And that was a big deal to her. So there was no doubt in my mind that this person was communicating to me, on behalf of my mom. And that's when my marriage was dissolving. Mickey and I were figuring out we were in love with each other. And, there's kids involved and husbands and houses and jobs and properties and all of that entanglement that it all unraveled over time. But in that first communication with my mother about this, I was shocked because one of the biggest things in my mind to keep me in my marriage and have me not walk towards the true person that I am, which is a lesbian. And I've been one my whole life and had no idea until I was 34 years old. But once I knew, I could trace back to things that were like, oh, that's what that was about. So it was really kind of one of the most major defining moments in my life was that experience. And the experiences in Sedona were of a different nature. They were not based on a stressful, anxious situation.
But, okay, so the psychic, though, so she really amazed you by talking about the stuff about your mom saying she's okay with what's going on and the problems with the feet and everything. Was there anything in particular, like when you said you kind of, it's a big deal to leave somebody you've been married to for a long time and then like with children and everything, and you're on the other side of the country from where you're all from and stuff like that. And like you said, you didn't know that you were a lesbian before it kind of hit you, and then you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense, right? And so you're going through that. Right. And so as that's developing, and I know you go over this in light at the end of the tunnel, but were you finding little things in your life so you met you met your wife by accident, by just getting the name wrong on an email. And this would eventually, lead you to change your life completely. Were you finding other accidents, like random things that kept on, was it almost like you were blundering towards your eventual destiny?
It felt like that because there were other things that became defining in my life that were just hints in my past. And then as things started to unravel, I always had a pull towards Melissa Etheridge, her music. And, not because she was a lesbian, that didn't mean anything to me when I start listening to her music. I was supposedly a straight person with a bunch of kids and a husband. But I was always drawn to her music and to her messages of truth, and I never understood why. And after I moved to California, Mickey and I wound up going to a Melissa Etheridge concert together, just the two of us. It was a random act. It wasn't planned. We just wound up getting these tickets, and we went. And it turned out to be a defining moment in the sense that at that event, it became very obvious to us what our relationship was going to be, what was really going on between us. Also around that time, I was seeking guidance, spiritual guidance. I was raised Catholic. I had let go of my Catholicism. It was not a helpful spirituality for me. It was guilt-ridden. I didn't have a positive experience with that religion at all from a young child. I always felt like you'd go to church and be shamed. You never came home feeling good about it. And I was very involved in the church. I was in the teen club. I ran events for the church. So I had really immersed myself in organized religion, but I felt this incredible pull towards spirituality. And a friend of mine and I went to see a Buddhist monk. And as soon as I stood in front of him and he looked at me, he called out Mickey right away. And he called her out by name. And he said, this person is here to give something back to you. And this person is meant to be in your life. But he could never tell us what it was that she was going to give back, because neither one of us got the sense it was something physical, like some kind of object. We had the sense it was something deeper, something on a spiritual level. Still haven't figured that out.
Well, so when did you go see the monk, though, this wasn't before you guys had met or anything, that he had called a name, like before you knew each other or anything, right?
This was when we were in California. Okay. And Mickey and I were still in our marriages to our husband. And I had a pull towards this Buddhist temple. I just, for no reason whatsoever. And I used to drive past it. I had a client right there. And I told my friend, I just feel like we need to go to this Buddhist temple. And she's like, oh, I heard about that temple. There's monks in there, and they do numerology and other readings. So we wound up going there. And as soon as I had my reading with this monk, you go and bring your birth date and some other, what time you're born and some other things. And the first thing he said to me is, there's a woman, it starts with an M, and she's here to give something back to you. And I couldn't believe what he said, because I hadn't told him anything about anything.
Well, I'd never gone to a Buddhist monk that does like fortune telling kind of things. So I'm really interested in this, because I want to go now. So this is a Buddhist temple, and what kind of reading was it? He didn't have cards or tea leaves, or what was he doing?
It's numerology. You have to go with your birth date, the time that you were born, and the city and state that you were born in. Okay. And they use numerology, and they do it by hand. There's no calculators or computers. They were Thai monks, so their language, you couldn't really tell what they were writing, because it was in Thai language. So it was an amazing experience. And I found that after that, a friend of mine and I, we continued to go back to this Buddhist temple whenever we were, my friend was going through the dissolution of her marriage, so we were kind of helping each other through it, and we would go back to these monks every so often, and they ran meditation.
It sounds like everybody comes to California to get divorced. Remind me not to move there. No, that just made me laugh when you think it's like, oh, my friend too, and then everybody's. But the thing is, if you go, you need a change in your life. That's always what that's why the Red Hot Chili Peppers write a million songs about it, right? Right. Looking and changing your life or seeing what happens. So you're going through all that. And number one, I am super interested in the Buddhist numerology, specifically because When you think about psychics like John Edwards, the people you see on TV, they can use their knowledge of English, their knowledge of cold reading, they can use your acknowledgement, your eyes, all that kind of body language to make guesses. Somebody who maybe their first language isn't English, like you said, like a Thai monk, right. That makes it extra interesting to me because they have to, if they were going to read you like James the Amazing Randi or something, they would have to use a completely different body language or a completely different type of read than a native English speaker would. And so I wonder how you would do it just based on body language and all that kind of thing alone. So that's an interesting thing. So that's a fun thing to learn. If anybody out there has any more experiences with this kind of numerology, tweet at us at OthersideTalk. Twitter.com/OthersideTalk. I want to hear about it. But going on. So, you're going through this. You have all these psychic experiences where the psychics are telling you your mom's okay to change your life. The Buddhist monk's telling you, hey, this Mickey person's in your life for a particular reason, to give something to you, to change your life. And anything else happening around? Because, those are some big things right there. For people who don't know, you're in the middle of falling in love with someone completely new and in the middle of something you wouldn't have expected before. Were things happening in any of your family or your kids having things that all kind of led them in that direction either?
Well, it's interesting because I'm just going to go back just a tiny bit.
Sure.
It's when I was about 15 years old, I was invited to my neighbor's wedding, and it was a last-minute thing. I was a kid, so they were like, hey, we got a bunch of people that can't come the last minute, and these are next-door neighbors that are like family. We called them aunt and uncle, and so it's very close-knit, just not blood relative. And they're like, you want to come to the wedding? And I was like, okay, I'll come to the wedding. And my mother and I, my mom, of course, was still alive then. We went to the church while they got married. And then what they were inviting me to was a reception afterwards in a
Sure.
big fancy Italian wedding in a catering hall. But when we walked out of the church, I said to my mother, something major is going to happen to me today. I don't know what it is, but I have this feeling. I've had this feeling before. Something always happens when I have this feeling, and I feel like it's going to happen today. And that is the day I met my ex-husband. It was his cousin marrying my best friend, neighbor, and we met at that wedding. He was my first and only boyfriend, and we got married 4 years later. And all of these, I've had this experience time and time again where something major is going to happen. Two of our children we have 4 kids, three girls and a boy. The boy is going to be 30 this year, and our oldest daughter is going to be 36. So they're adults now.
Sure.
But one of my daughters left her career at Hulu, and it was a very good job, to pursue her own business as an intuitive and spiritual counselor. She uses tarot as some of her as her tools, and is building a practice around spirituality, intuition, and helping people recognize that each and every one of us has intuition. In some of us, it's closer to the surface, and we want it to be, and we manifest it. And the more that we do that, the more we see, the more we hear, and the more we are aware. I could talk about some orbs in a minute related to that.
Sure.
But some of us bury it. So this one daughter has a practice, so she has even more intuition than I do.
Well, I think it's interesting here, real quick. I mean, just you're going into that you talk about your gut punch, and then you had these several experiences in your life, and you kind of come back to that. That you said, like, well, even when I was 16, I felt like something was going to happen. So much so you said to your mom. And I don't know, when you're 16 years old, you probably don't think specifically that that's the day you're going to meet somebody that you're going to spend most, a good portion of your life with and raise a family with kind of thing. And then that kind of happens, and you get that beforehand. Like I would say that things in my life happened to me out of left field that I was like, holy crap, how did that happen? And then all of a sudden your life's changed.
Right.
To have that kind of like knowing, that's like soldiers get that warning, before they know when they're walking into the battlefield, or boxers before they get into the ring. You seem to have had that. Something told you that your life is going to change, before you actually even knew it was going to happen. So that kind of intuition is something interesting that you felt it for yourself. And do you think that with your daughter's work, she's helping other people recognize it? Or maybe if she's sensitive, she can see something that's going to be happening to them?
I think she, I don't know that she can see something that's going to happen to them, but I think she has the ability to help them tap into their own intuition where they're able to see these things and feel these things. Because the intuition is there. It's kind of humming beneath the surface. And, when you're young, your life is so busy. It's school, it's homework, it's college, you get married maybe, you have kids, or you have a very busy job. Whatever the case is, you're so busy doing things that you miss the signals. But the signals are there. And if you pay attention to them, they will guide you. It happened to me in my career. I knew every time I had a career change, it was based on a gut feeling and an intuition that happened before. In one case, the longest it took 4 years. In the shortest case, it took about a week before I had a new job. I just knew it was going to happen. And I'm talking about the jobs that I were in were very deep-rooted jobs where I was in it. I was committed to the company. I was an integral part of the company. And no way I'm going to leave this company. But yes, I did because something came up. So I've always paid attention to that because the gut was so strong that I couldn't ignore it. And one of our other daughters, not the daughter with the intuitive counseling spiritual practice, but our other daughter, she gets gut feelings like me beforehand, and they're always realized, whatever it is. Whatever that gut feeling is, something happens within a period of time. And our son has the same thing. Now, I believe our other daughter does as well, but she's not tapped into that. And she's not manifesting that. In fact, she doesn't have any interest in that. So in her case, I think it's going to lie dormant. But we'll see. She has children, and we'll see where that goes. If it comes out in the kids, in the next generation.
Sure. Well, so that's something that you start feeling in the gut, then change happens, and you're following your intuition around, and now you're seeing your intuition be validated from your regular kind of psychic to the new astrological reading from the Thai monk. So as your life is changing, and your whole family situation is changing and stuff like that. Did you get any more messages that you were on the right path? I mean, it sounds like you've got a bunch already, but was there a final message that you're like, you know what? I can't deny this any longer. I've got to change?
It's interesting. 2019 was a banner year for me in my life. It was a year like nothing. What I experienced in 2019 is like nothing I've ever experienced in my life. And I've experienced some major things in my life. Meeting Mickey, all of these gut feelings, moving from New York to California, now all these very, very big things. But in 2019, I just had, and again, this came involuntarily, I just had this very deep feeling that I had to walk through some major fears that I still had in my life. And do things that I've always wanted to do. And one of those things was I'd like to become a keynote speaker. I've done speeches, and I've taught classes, and I've gone to conferences, and I've delivered workshops, but I really wanted to deliver a keynote about something I felt very passionate about, which was collaboration and sharing and all of this stuff.
Okay.
I met Steven Zimmer and Holly Felipe, just randomly by accident, and
they're
went on their
they're the
show.
ones that run the Imaginarium convention in Kentucky, right?
That's right. That's right. I went on their show. I did not, that whole engagement led to me being a keynote at 2019 Imaginarium Conference. So that fear was realized. I had a desire to become a singer because I've always been a musician, but I've never had the guts, frankly, to sing. I would always get to the point in a song that I was playing where I had to sing and nothing would come out, even when I forced myself. And I've overcome that this year. So I've had a lot of these things where I feel like I'm at spiritually and in my intuition is that anything that I set my mind to doing is going to happen. And it's going to happen faster than in the past in my life and again, I go back to being younger, having more responsibilities and less free time and all of that kind of stuff, especially raising kids, that's totally the focus. And now that isn't the focus anymore, the visibility for me on my universe, the energy and the spirituality around me it's just exploded. It's been amazing.
And so how do you think that has had an effect on the way you tell stories? Because so much of what happens in a paranormal or a spiritual experience is inside the experiencer. So much of a paranormal experience is, well, you kind of had to be there to get it. Because it's hard to write about how these experiences feel. Have you found in your own storytelling, as you say, you've empowered yourself and you felt more spiritually in tune, with the world? Have you found your storytelling has been affected by these spiritual experiences or in trying to describe them?
I do believe so because, I'm a nonfiction writer. So whatever I write is true. I do have some work that's published that is fiction, just made up stories, made up characters and all of that. But the majority of my literary work, non-business, this is just what I'm doing now, is as a nonfiction writer. So the things that I experience find their way into my books, into my poems. I'm going to release a poetry book in 2020. People, not everybody appreciates poetry, and people who do sometimes they have their taste for poetry is very specific. So publishing a poetry book is a big risk because it requires a certain audience. But this poetry book is based on spirituality. It's based on connecting to another person on a deeper, below the surface level. The poems, the book is called Poems and Provocations, Love's Pain and Pleasures. So the poems are about meeting someone that you connect with on a deep level and you're separated by miles. And it's relevant whether you're in a friendship or a love affair. But this book really has really manifested a lot of the things that have come out in me as a result of recognizing my own intuition, spirituality, whatever you want to call it. I find myself drawn to, I've always loved dusk and darkness, but even more so this year. I was talking to somebody who asked me the other day, do you think you're a werewolf? Because I guess the way I was describing, like I want to just go out and sit on the front porch and watch the mountains because we have mountains right across from our house.
Sure.
And when that sun starts to go down and that dark starts to come, I just want to be in it. There's crows flying all over the place. And I paid very little attention to this up until, I would say, a couple of years ago. And so it's interesting because I think you see these things, you just can't feel these things when you're when your life is busy, or whatever it is that blocks the spiritual essence from hitting your brain and saying, whoa, this, I'm really drawn to this. I'm drawn to dusk. I'm drawn to dark. It's where I feel the safest, the calmest, the most serene is in this particular environment. And that's something new for me over the last several years, because that's something I did not recognize in myself as a child, but I do recognize it now. I recognize always wanting to be out at dark, and you think, oh, it's lightning bugs and all of that stuff you see on the East Coast, but it really isn't. It's something deeper. It's a deeper need that gets filled by something around you, some kind of stimulus, and that's how innate that feels to me. And it is in my writing. It's in this new book that's coming out in 2020. Towards the end of the year, that book will come out. And it is in my short storytelling.
And, just a couple more things here. I think it's funny when somebody's like, well, you think you're a werewolf? There is something, they call it in film and in photography, when you say dusk, people call that magic hour because of the natural lighting is beautiful, and you have to, it requires less work to make a subject look great at magic hour when you're shooting on traditional film. Maybe not so much with digital now, but when you go back to traditional film, they used to do that and call that magic hour. And that's always the time between light and dark, the liminal period. It's why we feel that, fall, the time between the death of winter and the life blooming of summer, that's the time where the veil between the worlds is the thinnest. And so being attracted to like dusk and that period between the dark of night and the light of day, those periods of liminality traditionally are the points where people have had more spiritual experiences. Vespers, in talking about Catholic, and the reason like the prayers and the bells went off at dusk was that they were, they were encouraging prayer at that certain time of day. And so being attracted to that almost seems to me, instead of being weird, when it comes to the spiritual or the supernatural, seems to be more natural than anything else. Like that's the time of day where you're going to do your magic spell, or that's the time of day where you're going to feel the most spiritual.
Well, that's really interesting that you say that, because I had not thought about that or had any awareness about that. But I will say this, and you might have some thoughts on this. I've always been drawn to the season, to fall. That is my season. And I remember when I was a kid, I couldn't wait for September to come, because you live in New York. The summers were brutal, but so what? You're a kid. It didn't matter. What attracted me to the fall was going out at night, putting on like a sweater. And I used to, actually, up until having this conversation with you, I thought it was the act of being a kid, having your first little job. I used to sell Christmas cards to the people on the block. And back in the day, before all of this instant gratification and technology, you had to walk around the neighborhood and ring your neighbors' bells and show them this catalog of sample Christmas cards that they could have their names printed, and they would fill out an order form. And that's how I made my money for the year. And I couldn't wait for the fall, but I hated ringing the bell. And I really didn't like selling the Christmas cards.
Right.
But I loved being on my street, out in the dark, in that cool weather where you get that chill up your back, and you have a cozy sweater. The moon is illuminated, and I felt like, if this was Nirvana, this would be my Nirvana.
And well, that's, that time of year, that season, is, people, from the Druids on or whatever, they always associated that with more of a, like a spiritual experience. So maybe you could have been picking up on that.
Yeah.
Even as a young person. Now, I want to make sure we get to the, you talked about a couple of things earlier that we already have a couple of visitations from your mother, and then let's get to the later visitations from your mother. As far as she seems to have showed up at certain points in your life to help you with hard decisions, or at least to comfort you in whatever direction you decided to go into. When was the next time you saw her again?
The next time I saw her was in our house in Sedona. I hadn't seen her for many, many years, and our house is located in the village of Oak Creek. And because Sedona has several areas, but in the village of Oak Creek is Bell Rock, Cathedral Rock, Castle Rock, and Courthouse Rock. And these rocks, especially Bell Rock, I'll put it this way. We had some electrical problems in our house. We called an electrician. He came. He couldn't figure it out. Could not solve the problem. Didn't know what these switches did, why the lights went on randomly. Had no clue, and this was his answer. It's Sedona. This is what happens. And the belief is, and I believe it, that this area has an influx of spirits, especially around Bell Rock, because a lot of people throw ashes of their loved ones on Bell Rock. In fact, my wife and I told our kids, if you're able to, that's where we want to go, on Bell Rock. So I was in our house, and I just turned my head, and there was my mom right there with this flowing white nightgown in the foyer of our house in Sedona, and she was smiling. And I've seen that, and I've seen it happen at least 10 times in the last 2 years. And my wife hasn't seen it, but I've seen it. So we have a friend who used to be a physics teacher. She taught quantum physics in high school, and she left her career in education to pursue another thing, fitness-related thing.
Sure.
But she's also an intuit, and we didn't know that because we met her as a result of her fitness work, and we became friends with her, and she came to our house. Well, I'll back it up a bit.
Yeah.
She used to run a Zumba class, and in the middle of her Zumba class in Sedona, she would run through the class and she's swatting away things. And we're like, what are you doing? What is that? She's like, these damn spirits, they're everywhere. They're disrupting my class. So this woman actually can see spirits, if you believe that, which I do. She told us once, if you go to Famous Pizza, that's the name of the pizza store, there's two of them. One is in West Sedona, one is in the village. If you go to the one in the village, there's fairies in there. I've seen them floating around. So that's her take on it. She comes to our house in Sedona to hang out with us and have some coffee. And we sit down and we're chatting. She's there about 5 minutes, and she gets up and she says, excuse me, I have to do this. And she lays on the floor. And she said, I just can't take the chatter in this house. There are so many spirits in this house. It's so distracting. I have to lay on the floor. And she laid there for 20 minutes talking to us from a prone position, lying on the floor. So, you know, these are the kinds of things that are going around that are there that not everybody sees. In Sedona, if I've taken pictures on my iPhone, and I can send you those pictures if you're interested.
Sure.
You don't see when you take the picture, there's nothing there on the screen. You don't see it. But after the picture is taken, there's orbs. They're little green round dots, and some of them look like satellite dishes. And and there's a certain one, and I believe that these orbs follow me. And a psychic that I went to confirmed that, and I didn't tell her about these orbs. She said, you have spirit guides, and they manifest in the shape of orbs, and they're around you all the time. And she also told me my mother and my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, my mom's mom, she said, they're with you all the time. They're watching you. So that's probably why I see my mom. I don't see my grandma. I'll have to start manifesting that because she was the greatest influence in my entire life. But anyway, so I have these photos, And so we have two homes. We go back and forth. And we're in Palm Springs now, and I take some pictures on the front porch, and there's the orbs. It's the same orbs that I see in Sedona. Now, little green dots are subjective, right? You can maybe
Sure.
get a little green dot, or a dot is a dot, but these satellite dish things, it looks like a satellite dish. It has like a bar. It has a red dot. It has another blue dot at the bottom. It's a fantastic visual thing. So that's happened, and it's happened here. And when I spoke to the spiritual person, they're like, those are your spirits. They're with you. They're following you.
Now, has anyone else experienced something in your house? Has your wife experienced, like, as the people who spend the most time there, have, any of your family members seen anything else in that house? Because it seems like when you talk about an interesting place and everybody putting their ashes, on the rock and everything, that there's might be a lot of energy there of some sort, or
Right.
a lot of energy expended, and the Zumba lady comes by and is like, oh, I got to take a break and lay on the ground because there's too many spirits in the house. If I would be like, well, that's probably too much wine talking, but that's just me. But the thing is,
but it was like 2:00 in the afternoon. And we had just eaten Indian food for lunch. I mean, there was no drugs or alcohol or
Right.
anything. So it was, and we've seen her do this in other places. And I actually went to a class she taught on quantum physics and how it relates to spiritual energy, which was fantastic. But that's a whole other conversation. But anyway, no, I don't know. My wife does not prescribe to this, so she doesn't see that there, but she is very interested in these photographs that keep showing these things that keep popping up, because I'm not putting them there. I have no way to do that.
have you found any of the, when you say that people talk to you about spirit guides and stuff, have you found that any of the messages that they've given you, besides the one that came through that said, oh, your mother and her hurt feet, anyone in particular that have kind of stuck out to you that you're like, oh man, you called it? Or, because I'm always interested, because I've seen some psychics and I've talked to people, and I've never had somebody say something to me that really got me. That I was like,
Right.
okay, everything always felt like it could have been a horoscope like a syndicated horoscope, like anything could apply to anybody. So have you ever had, because now it sounds like you've seen a variety of people, you've had this kind of intuition thing where you've had a physical reaction to something before it has happened. And have you found any particular psychics or fortune tellers or anything like that, beyond the ones you've told us, that have had that effect where you're like, okay, you got me. Like, I'd have no idea how you knew that.
Well, I had two kind of strange experiences with another person that I was in a relationship with, a woman, and it was a serious relationship, and she was very spiritual. We both prescribed to that. So we had a lot of really crazy things happen between us. Like, I'd be driving to work and I'd be like, oh my God, she's doing this right now, whatever it was. And I would go to work, open up my email, and there would be an email there saying, I just finished doing this, whatever it is. I'm like, she's painting, or she's, composing a new song, because she was an artist and a musician and all that. It was a tangible thing. I would just have this vision in the front of my head of whatever, a song, and I would go to work and open my email, and she'd say, I just wrote a song on the way to work. And so we would have these simultaneous things. We had tattoos on the same day, and neither one of us told the other person we were getting tattoos. And we would have these simultaneous experiences happen all the time. We were on Venice Beach once, and we went to a psychic called the Goddess of the Moon. And we go, okay, this is BS. It's Venice Beach. She's probably not legit, and she's just getting tourists. So we waited, and we were going to get our palms read. And we're standing next to each other, and at the time, my girlfriend says, oh, what's wrong with your hand? And I was like, what's wrong with my hand? She goes, you hardly have any lines on your hand. Look at my hand. And her hand was loaded with lines. I'm not talking about like your lifeline. I'm talking about all the little lines on your hand.
Sure.
I mean, like her whole hand looked wrinkled. And I'm like, I don't know. We go to this psychic, and the first thing the woman says to me is, "You're a terrible driver." And my girlfriend almost fell off the chair because, yes, I am. I'm a good driver when I pay attention, but when I don't, I'm like, I always get lost. I can't even find my house. So that was very interesting. And then she said to the not to me, but to the woman, "Let me see your hand." And we had just been talking about it like a half hour earlier. And she goes, "Oh, you're a very old soul. Look at all those lines on your hand." So, of course, I was like, see, you were making fun of my hand, but really it was your hand that was the talk of the town, not me. So I've had very simultaneous things. When we were together, our relationship was on again, off again, and we both went to psychics separately, not together. And this psychic, the one that told me about my mom, also told me that me and my ex, that we we had been fighting over the same woman in the Civil War. That's what she said. We were both men in a past life. But then she started to go into the stuff about being in the Victorian age, which was really kind of interesting because I always felt like I lived in that time, and I always felt like I somehow had like a green velvet, one of those long gowns with the corsets, and you know how they are when women are walking around the street in like the late 1800s.
Yeah.
What that might look like. And she described that scene to me and said, "You lived in the late 1800s in the Victorian time, and you were a prominent woman." That's what she told me. And she said, "I see you. You're wearing a green velvet, whatever." So I didn't tell her that.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, what I think is a couple of things are interesting here. Number one, the kind of radar love you have with the other person, where you're picking up little things psychically, little stuff, things that they'd worked on. You're thinking about things at the same time. You're somehow communicating through space without a phone, without email.
Right.
You're communicating in your emotion, either emotionally or psychically, some kind of way. Now, where does this woman fit in? So in your time, I'm just trying to figure the timeline here. So you're in California. Is this before you get married, or are you taking a break?
No, this is after when Mickey and I figured out we were in love with each other, and I left my marriage, and Mickey did not leave her marriage when I left my marriage. She was on her own journey, so we were not together as a couple until after we really were pursuing divorces from our husbands, which was about a year and a half later. So there was a period of time after I divorced my husband that I was dating, and this was the person that I dated during that period of time and had a very serious relationship with.
And what I think is interesting here, though, too, is that, like you said, so you said that your husband was your first boyfriend, your first real relationship and everything. And so then this is your second relationship, right? Decades later.
In a way it is, because my relationship with Mickey at the time, I would say, I was in love with Mickey before, but it was tied up in all of the coming out as a lesbian and, being married and all of that. So this other relationship I was single. And so, yes, that is true. That was the first, that was the second relationship I had that was like a real relationship where you were single and had the freedom to pursue it. So that is true.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting too, because this is happening after you've been a mother, after probably decades of being married. And what I think is interesting about that is that most of us, we go through it, and we have a bunch of practice of failed relationships before we get to a marriage, right? You go through, you're like, okay, I tried this one, didn't work. Tried this one, this girl hates me. Tried this one, this girl really hates me. You go through your entire life, and you do that until you finally figure it out. Or at least figure it out as best as you can, and you find someone who can tolerate you all the time. And so it's just interesting here that when you're talking about this psychic connection, you're finally following your intuition to the point where you're like, okay, this is who I am. You're redefining who you are, or at least who you thought you were, and you're redefining it into something that feels more natural and something that feels more like you. And as you're following your intuition that way, you're starting to see more psychic experiences happen. Now, whether or not this worked out with this particular woman or whatever, that's just, that's just one of the stops along the way kind of thing when you get to your final destination. But what's interesting, I think, in this through line here is that the more you're following your intuition to where you need to be and your quote unquote destiny, the more psychic experiences you seem to be having. So as you're on your direction, that might not be the person in the end who you spend your life with, or the rest of your life with, but it's showing you that you're going where you need to be going because you're having these experiences, you're having these synchronicities and these little psychic flare-ups on your way there.
Yeah, definitely. And my relationship with Mickey is very interesting because we put things in each other's heads. And it's more than, your partner. I mean, we're going to be married 20 years this September. So, you know your partner pretty well when you've been together for 20 years. But this is something different. This is like I'm thinking about, whatever. I'm thinking about subject A. And I'll say, honey, subject A. And she'll say, oh, my God, I put that in your head because I thought about it 30 seconds ago. And this happens constantly where we are so in tune with each other on a spiritual level. And keep in mind, Mickey doesn't manifest her spirituality because that's not her makeup.
Sure.
But yet she still tapped into it because I didn't have that in my marriage to my husband. I had it in another relationship, but I didn't have it in that other big relationship, my first marriage. But with Mickey, it happens all the time. She'll say, oh, we have to buy the baby shoes. He grew out of his shoes. And I'm like, oh my God, I was just going to tell you, our daughter called and said, the baby needs shoes. Do you guys want to, because we always say, when the baby needs shoes, let us know. We want to buy him shoes. So it's things like that occur all day long.
Well, and I think that's that's a good place where we can kind of leave the message of the story. And Sallyanne, I've really enjoyed talking to you today. I think your story is fascinating. I wish you luck with the poetry book and with everything in the Golden Crown Literary Society. People can find that at goldencrown.org. They can find your information at Sallyanne Monti. That's Monty with an I. Sallyanne Monti. We're going to have all of that in our show notes and othersidepodcast.com/285. But I think the perfect place, as you said, you're in the right place and these little things happen and you followed your intuition in time to have a fulfilling relationship in your life. And you followed your intuition in time enough to be able to find the self that you wanted to, the self that you needed to. And I think it's a great message for people. Your intuition, you feel it inside, whether it's a gut punch or a pricking at the back of the neck. Pricking at the back of the neck.
Right.
Or, anything that lets you know that that innate sense of the directions we should go to, the more you avoid that, the further you're going to get away from probably where you need to be. And I think your story is a real lesson in listening to yourself and finding that intuition, how it helps you find where you need to be.
Yeah, and I would say one thing is that intuition and memory are two different things. And I think that people confuse an intuitive experience with a memory. A memory is you're sitting there and you remember your third birthday and blowing out the candles. That's a memory. But, seeing your mom in front of you for 10 or 20 seconds, just standing there in a white gown, and then thinking about your mom, who isn't on the planet anymore, is not a memory. It's a vision. That was a visit. That was a spiritual visit by by that person. So I think learning the difference between what a memory is and what a vision is, you become so more aware of what's going on around you, and it's amazing.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sallyanne, for your time today. I really appreciate that. One more time, in case people are too lazy to go to the show notes and they're just on their phone right now, where's the best place that they can find you so they can check out your books and the different authors and stories that you're helping to bring about to the world?
Well, there's two places. One is on my website. It's Sallyanne, Sallyanne, Monti, Monti.com. And the other place is at thegoldencrown.org. And we have an annual conference. We have a host of paranormal authors. We have a very big paranormal sci-fi following. So check out the Golden Crown Literary Society. And if you have any questions, just reach out to me there and pay attention, because there's stuff going on around us. That's all.
That's perfect.
That's how I would close it. Pay attention.
The feeling of the gut punches that changed Sallyanne's life are a testament to the power of intuition and how your body seems to know the right place you should be even when your mind is far behind. Now, it took Sallyanne decades to find out where she was supposed to be, and hopefully you can find your place a lot faster than that. But that's the inspiration behind this week's song. Here's Sunspot with The Closer You Get.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at OthersidePodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
Hello, this is Wendy, and first of all, I'd like to thank Mike and Sallyanne for the great discussion today. I enjoyed meeting Sallyanne last year at the Imaginarium convention, where not only did I get to hear her do a reading from her book, but I also remember her being an enthusiastic member of the audience when Mike and I performed some songs and discussed a bit about the storytelling process of songwriting with Scott Marcus. These are the kinds of things that we love to do here at See You on the Other Side and in Sunspot. And if you'd like to be part of the supportive community behind us, please visit OthersidePodcast.com/donate. That is our Patreon community, which is a group of people who contribute a little bit of money each month. And that makes it possible for us to produce and publish this show and write and record new songs and videos. It's a lot more than just that, though. We also discuss the topics that we cover here on the show and topics maybe we haven't covered yet, but that people would like to hear about more or have us dig into deeper. We also have a live online hangout, which is just a video chat every month, and that's where we can catch up on all the paranormal things, the movies and TV shows we're watching, books we're reading, and really just life in general or anything anybody wants to chat about. And it's very easy to join the community, so just visit othersidepodcast.com/donate, and that will take you right to our Patreon site, and you can contribute as much or as little as you want. Now, a special shout out goes to one specific Patreon member, and that's Dr. Ned. He contributes at a level that gets him his own custom acknowledgement on every single episode. And thank you, Ned, because we really do truly appreciate you. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have an absolutely awesome week.